Hello everyone and welcome to Contemporary Street Theatre Festival SPOT. This is Festival's online educational program, during which we are talking about what it means to create in public space. Today we've already had the first presentation. Ekaterina Lavrinets talked about co-creating the neighborhoods through art practices. You can find her presentation online. And now we are starting our acquaintanceship with the artists and their practices. I'm happy to introduce Benjaminas Vandewalle, an artist and choreographer from Belgium. In his work, he explores the perception of space and movement in a variety of contexts, both in the theatre and on location. This year, Benjamin was supposed to come to Vilnius to SPOT Festival and present his work, Walking the Line in Šnipiškės, the same neighborhood that Ekaterina Lavrinets talked about today. Unfortunately, his performance had to be postponed till the next festival due to COVID-19, but we are happy to have Benjamin with us today online, and he is going to talk about internalizing the black box. My name is Monica Gimbutaite. I am a culture journalist, and I will be moderating this session. After the presentation, there is going to be a Q&A. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask them. You can write your questions in the comments section. So Benjamin, hello. Thank you very much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello. So yes, first of all, thank you for everybody who's organizing this and making this possible. And that even though there was this is this corona crisis, that we still find ways to connect and talk about art. But let's dive straight into it. So I'm just gonna share my screen so that you can see my presentation. Okay, is this working? I think so. Okay, so yeah, first of all, this is a bit of a weird situation. I am talking to people looking at a green dot that tells me that the camera is on, and looking at my own presentation. So I'm just doing my best to imagine a theater in front of me full of 200 people that are listening and looking at me very attentively. So, internalizing the black box. So, basically, I would like to take you through a journey, what it means for me to, what it means to make art in the public space, and why I find that so interesting, and what are the artistic potentials related to that, and also the challenges and difficulties, and especially also what is the difference between the black box and the public space. Because initially my practice, I'm a choreographer, dancer, with a background first in ballet, classical ballet, then moving into contemporary dance and making pieces for the theater, for the black box, which I still do. But then at a certain moment I shifted into my interest into public space, which really opened up a lot of interesting possibilities, which I would like to share with you. And I'm using my works that I've created in the past as a vehicle to talk about art making in public space. So, first of all, it is, well, I would like to, talk about the core practice of my work, where it all stems from or starts from. And basically it's all rooted in a quite intense meditation practice called Vipassana Meditation, which is literally translated is insight meditation, seeing the true nature of reality. So in essence, this meditation practice, which has its root in Buddhist philosophy, is a practice of basically paying attention, just paying attention to one's own physical sensations, mental activities, and emotional landscapes that are happening inside of us. And by paying attention very rigorously. And by adding concentration practice, one is able to stay with all these internal phenomena and really observe one's own true nature. And there's this connotation that it's a little bit new age, but it is really very down to earth practice where it's just observing what is going on inside and gaining insights into that. And what I find interesting is that it's not a practice where they're trying to teach you certain concepts by talking about them, but it's really about experiencing it physically and undergoing the experience so that one sees at first hand how we are actually put together and not how we think we are put together. And what I find interesting there is that the wisdom or the insight happens through experience, and that by seeing things differently, that's where a shift takes place in how we then later act in the world. And so coming from the idea that the way we perceive the world determines also the way we act in the world and take action in the world. And by simply shifting that perception, shifting in our way of seeing the world into a different angle, we start and open up to a more multiple perspective onto the world and understanding that there's also many different ways of seeing the world, and therefore also changing the way we behave. Now, just to give you a very concrete example on this is just the Copernicus Revolution, where just in the 17th century, they're basically there was this huge revolution where we start to understand that the Earth is not anymore the center of the universe, but is actually just a little dot rotating around the sun, and the sun is also, later on we discover, part of a much larger universe. But that simple shift of point of view had a huge effect on society. And to give another example of that, how shifts of perception can have a huge effect on how we interpret and see the world, is the phenomenon of the overview effect, which is basically comes from or happens to astronauts when they are propelled into space and see all of a sudden the Earth from that perspective, just seeing this little blue dot that is floating in the Earth. And it really just does something with you. You see reality from a different perspective. So there's this immediately psychological shift that happens within you. So just going to read it out loud. The overview effect is a cognitive shift in awareness reported by some astronauts during spaceflight, often while viewing the Earth from outer space. It is the experience of seeing firsthand the reality of the Earth in space, which is immediately understood to be a tiny, fragile ball of life, hanging in the void, shielded and nourished by a paper-thin atmosphere. From space, national boundaries vanish, the conflicts that divide people become less important, and the need to create a planetary society with the united will to protect this pale blue dot becomes both obvious and imperative. The thing that really surprised me was that Earth, projected an air of fragility. And why? I don't know. To this day. I had a feeling it's tiny, it's shiny, it's beautiful, it's home, and it's fragile. So again, just seeing these things differently. Really have from just literally a different place in space, there is something that happens in the way we experience the world. Just to give you one more example on how then that works, because it's not something that we have to do, it's just something that naturally takes place, and it's just about simply observing the breath or the internal sensations of the body in case of the Vipassana practice. And a very concrete example is that these kind of 3D things at home, maybe you can try gazing at this green screen. If you kind of really go close to it and kind of make like a, cross your eyes a bit, there is this butterfly that appears. And this is just naturally by just paying attention, just by seeing, just by observing. Naturally, a shift in perception happens just by the act of paying attention. Well, you can find many of these online if you want to really have, if it didn't work in the time that I just gave you. Just one last quote I would like to give you before I dive actually into the actual works is from the book Unflattening by Nick Soasanis, and it's basically it's his PhD that he wrote in comic book form. And it's all about like untangling and unpacking all these different ways of perceiving and how we can open up to a kind of multi-perspective of the world, rather having this unified, just one point of view of reality, but understanding that there's multiple perspectives of the reality that we share. And so what I find interesting there in this quote, which I'll just read out loud now: to create perspective literally lies between our eyes, because we see from two different points of view that are merged into one, we create depth. Again, both literally and figurative. So it's really, that what I like that, about this multiple perspective that I'm talking about, that it's actually very physically embodied in how we see the world. With one eye, we just see the world more in two dimensions, but by adding a second point of view, immediately depth, literally and figuratively also starts to appear in our world. So really placing all these different perspectives next to each other is what creates depth into our experience. But without further ado, I go straight into the works. But it was just important to give this kind of base so you understand where I'm coming from. So first work that I would like to just share with you, which was one in the black box, but it is a platform where you see the audience sitting right there, but that platform has wheels on it. So behind that box, there's people that are moving around the audience. And these walls that you can see also have wheels and also have people moving those walls. So basically, I was creating a kind of mini theater, and just using the same format as a theater, having a tribune, having an audience, having walls, framing the backdrop. So, but all this, instead of it being mobile, was put into motion. And that immediately has a big effect on how we perceive movement, for example, because what I found fascinating in that piece was that when, as a choreographer, the discovery that movement itself, actually isolated by itself, doesn't really exist, in a sense that it's only because the backdrop behind me, for example, is not moving with me, that you can see these movements. Or actually, even if I take this camera, if I, move my head in relationship to this camera, then my relationship with the camera is stillness. Between my head and my camera is stillness, and it's the surrounding that is moving. So it's really very basically put, it's like when you're sitting in a train and the train next to you is moving, and you think that you are actually moving. So it's this relativity of movement. Now, well, this will become apparent later on why tackling this work is important to explain the continuation of the other works. But what I find important here, or an important aspect to note, is that what I'm always kind of searching for in my work is recreating new formats in which we can pay or we can see the performance or art or dance. Because the black box that we are used to is actually, in a way, a very site-specific format, installation, workplace that generates a certain kind of seeing and therefore generates a certain kind of experience. And it's the format that we know all over, but it really dictates how we will experience that world. And it's also a place of exclusion, in a sense that everything light and sound is all excluded, so it's all can be controlled to have that very particular effect that is desired, creating this fiction that we then observe as an audience. And already by literally putting it on wheels, all these kind of formats start to slide. All these rules start to slide and bend, and we are entering into this gray zone where these rules of theater or way we perceive things actually lose their habitual structure. Just to give you a little video. Some examples. So this is a short clip. Just going to turn down the sound a bit. Where for now it's just the walls that are moving, but opening up. Let's see if I can just shift to a part where we actually are moving. So here, yeah, we're moving towards the dancer, and it's really creating this kind of zooming effect. So it's not the dancer coming to the audience, but it's the audience moving towards the performer. And let me see. Yes, so this is the part that I wanted to share. So here you see that we're playing exactly with this train effect. And so you see me up here, and then here, you see that what is stillness becomes movement, and what is movement becomes stillness, or it all starts to blur. Okay. So we move on to the next work, which is a birdwatching 4x4, and 4x4 just making it was called 4x4 because it's taking the concept, okay, having a moving audience, but then putting it outdoors in the outdoor terrain, so it was like a Jeep, a 4x4 Jeep, so birdwatching 4x4. So basically inside of this box that you're seeing right now, there is 20 people sitting up, jammed up next to each other, and they're seeing through this little frame that you can see, this black kind of blinders, and they're seeing through this transparent mirror. And basically, from the inside, it is as if you are watching a film. It has the same ratio, like as a big flat screen that you would see. But with this difference, it is actually just the naked reality that you're seeing in front of you. Now, what happens is that this box then just moves through the city, pulled by a little tractor, and very slowly just moving past the facades of all these different buildings and through the city. And what happens is that all of a sudden, everyday reality becomes a performance, becomes a film, becomes a movie. And you kind of completely kind of re-experience that street and that city that you know very well and that you live in as a spectator, but all of a sudden you see it as if with new eyes, simply by taking place in this format. And of course, there's dancers that then kind of is interacting with that landscape and going even further with twisting the way we see and perceive and relate to that urban landscape by just reappropriating and reusing the space and behaving in that space in a completely different manner than that we are used to seeing people use that space. And they're moving in and out, sometimes just being in the everyday choreography of people moving, and then sometimes shifting out and playing with the acrobatics and movements that are very unusual to that context. Now, I think what was very interesting with this work, and which was the first work that I started making in the public space, is that the people that came out, they were really enthusiastic, they're really grateful. And the reason why, when talking to the audiences, was really that they were able to re-experience their city in this complete new manner. It's as if with this box you heighten the aesthetic quality of that street. People get emotional by seeing the beauty of this frame and all these people passing in these buildings in a way that they've never found a way to relate to that surrounding in such a way. Now, what is interesting when in this aspect, that or if you look at the ingredients, what creates that, is that basically you, instead of an active person inhabiting that space, you become a passive person sitting down. You're not moving, so you're being moved, and you're basically just paying attention, and you're also taking distance from the work. So what is important here, also when it comes down to creating work in the public space, is that you're all the time looking for your frame in which you can re-enter that public space. You can be interacting or seeing that space from a different point of view than is your usual habitual way of moving through that space. And especially what I also, I think, which is a core element, and which I'll come back to later, is that when working in the public space in relationship to the black box, is that in black box, it's like you're creating, like I said, it's a place of exclusion where you exclude all the elements, and then so that you can control the way you let them enter, the light, the music, the performers. And where here with Birdwatching 4x4, with this piece, it's a movement of inclusion. You're basically including everything that already exists and not creating a new fiction, but actually creating a piece, a new experience, not by creating something new to look at, but by creating a new way of looking at that what already exists. And I find this as an artistic approach, I find this very, very interesting to play with and to use. So as you can see here, you have so you see the audience sitting inside and watching through this mirror inside of this box. So they're also completely invisible. So there is, of course, this ultimate voyeur experience. So now we'll just go straight to a video. This is Marseille. And so you get a taste of what it looks like. So this was during a festival in 2014 in Marseille. Okay, so we go straight to another one. This is the same piece, but in Brussels. Just to give you a taste of also how it's different in each city or each landscape. So just to before I move on to the next piece, let me see. I need to make a little bit of a move on, but I think what was also important to say is that the difference between, like, when you use the first bird watching where it's all white walls, and just to give another example of this exclusion inclusion, is that it's in that first video that you saw, we're using the same walls principle of moving walls on wheels at the very end of the piece, but rather than having white walls, we use mirrors, because it didn't make sense to use these white walls alienated from the rest, but rather using surfaces that just include the landscape as it is, and using that as part of the scenography, and where we fold with the mirrors, we're playing with this folding movement. So it's whereas the city landscape literally folds into itself and becomes this kind of multi-dimensional landscape. Okay, but let's move on. So next piece I would like to talk about in the public space that I created is interview. And basically, as you can see, it is a box where one puts the head inside. And inside of that box, you find darkness at first, and then without knowing what it is that you're going to see, the light slowly goes on and you find yourself in a white box, like the dimension of an ordinary cardboard box, with another head just right in front of you, that is just looking at you, that is just looking you in the eyes silently. And basically you cannot do anything else but just looking that person in the eyes. And then slowly this box becomes smaller and smaller, so that space in between you even becomes smaller and smaller, and just looking that person in the eyes without really saying anything, or at least the performer that is in front of you doesn't really say anything. Now, it's important to note that the person in front of you is not necessarily a professional performer. We actually work with local volunteers, so the people that are inside of the box are also just people that belong, are inhabitants of the city, and that just know the game and are controlling the light, but for the rest, they are as much a spectator as you are. So it's just, the piece is created by just two members of the audience looking at each other. Now, it is very important to place this piece in the context of a public space, because it's the context of the public space that creates an extra meaning to this work, where, creating a contrast where we are walking through the space and we're kind of walking parallel next to each other, but we're never opposite each other, unless, for example, in a place like a metro or stuff like that. But we do kind of, it's considered impolite in our culture to, look each other in the eyes, just silently, and to stare at each other. So there, without knowing what it is, you are invited as an audience to put your head inside, and you're confronted with the other person with whom you share the public space, and just looking that person into the eyes. And it's exactly this which creates, why it's so important to put this piece in the public space. And also another aspect which I like, and this goes back to the more general question of what is the potential of making art in the public space, is that you catch people that are on their way to work or to go shopping, and they all of a sudden are presented with this possibility to put their head inside of this box, completely without knowing what is going to happen. They go inside, and there is a big difference there, where in a let's say theater, you kind of go, you plan it beforehand, you dress up, you go there with a certain intention, so you kind of already prepared. Whereas here, it just the artwork enters, pierces into your everyday pattern, in your everyday ritual, your everyday habits of walking through that street. And that I find really interesting. So it's not that we go to this kind of safe context and environment where now we're going to have this art experience. No, it's the art experience really kind of literally pierces through the everyday routine that you're doing in that public space. So that is another aspect that I found very interesting. So we're going to go straight to another piece. So this is the perisphere, which is a bed where you lie on as an audience. And basically this device makes it possible to see the reality and the people around you through different perspectives, coming from the periscope principle. So it's like when you're in a submarine, to look outside of the submarine, you have these two mirrors so that you can look above the sea line, what is going on. And so the same here is that you, for example, if you look through this mirror, which you can just see a tiny part of in the image, but from the top one, you are literally looking through the mirror, you are looking down onto the pavement, and it really feels as if you're flying, that you're having like this out-of-body experience, hovering over the people, over the crowd. So again, what happens here is, so in order to create a new perspective on the public space, it's really about creating this distance and this different angle. And here it's really kind of an out-of-body experience where you are hovering above the people. So this is another picture. And this is just to give you an example. So you can see there's this little anagram where you see there's the bed, and the little black figure is where your physical body is lying. But through these different mirrors, which are these lines on the drawing, these are the mirrors, and through these mirrors, your visual body is moved, propelled in all these different angles that you see there on the picture. So it's really kind of what I call an internal choreography, where your body through these mirrors is being moved in different places, and that is then moved through the public space. So your physical relationship with that public space is completely challenged. And so here we have Pedestrian Excel, which is a larger version that I created later on, where you go through this experience 4x4, 4 of you, listening to music and also following a dancer. So all these works are part of a larger piece, a collection of all different kind of installations, smaller ones, as you can see, that people can use to move around and explore the surroundings with. It's into a bigger kind of art fun fair called Studio Cité, where it's 8 different installations that all challenge the perception of each other and of the public space. And are put together in a fun fair that lasts for 3 or 4 days. And now what is important about that aspect is that it's really, I think the duration is important, so that it's not a piece that you come, just do your thing for an hour and then go away, but really what we wanted to do here is to be really present in the spot, and I think it's also what Ekaterina was saying in her presentation, the one for people who saw it at 12 o'clock, is that it's really this inhabiting the space and being there for a long time, and through that long time, that presence that takes longer than just a few hours, you really start to create a difference, and you really start to create the connection with the people, the dwellers of that environment. So, well, here's a little video just to give you an idea of this, what it looks like live. I'm going to skip forward a bit. So these are other installations that are part of this Studio Cité, but there's 2 more works that I really would like to talk about before we finish, because I see that the time is running so fast. So this is Walking the Line, and this is the piece that was supposed to be presented in the SPOT Festival this year, but will be taking place next year. And here you see a group of people, which is the audience. So it's a choreography for the audience that takes place in the public space. So you have 20 people, and they're all of the audience, and they're all wearing this mask, which looks like a virtual reality mask, but I call it an actual reality mask. And basically, it's just an open frame, yeah. But it focuses the attention of looking and kind of frames the reality that we live in, and therefore completely giving a new perspective and on the surroundings in the urban landscape, and especially zooming into details. And what is an important aspect here of this work, so as you can see, there are forming a line, and they're basically following instructions that I tell them, like open their eyes, close your eyes, look up, look down. And we made like a whole choreography, investigated a whole route in that space to kind of directly film with your own actual reality goggles the surrounding. Now, as I said in Birdwatching 4x4, what is important in this when working in public space is that you are creating this distance from which you can then perceive the reality in a different way. So whereas Birdwatching 4x4, it was literally a box, it's a kind of protective cage around you from which you could observe the world anonymously. Here, what I find interesting is that you're doing it by creating a new physical body. Just by touching the other people, you're creating one more body, and you kind of lose your individual identity in relation to the other people. So people see you and they just immediately kind of give you your distance. They don't understand what is going on. They don't get what you're doing. So which creates a kind of bubble from which you can then perceive the world from differently. And now, what is also I found very interesting, or where this kind of idea also came from, is that we are kind of deviating from the social norm. We are deviating from the habitual everyday choreography that takes place in a public space, where and exactly this is also the experience that I've wanted to give to the audience, is like to be in the public space but kind of transgressing the norm in a very gentle way, because here you see them placing their hands on the shoulders, but they're also just holding hands, making like this human chain with holding hands and moving through the city like that. But it's very funny to observe the reactions of people, because it's a behavior that is, we're not in any way creating a threat for anybody, and it's also very interesting that we don't have to ask for permission to do this work, because we're not breaking any rules. But yet, in a very subtle way, we are completely deviating from the norm, which creates a very interesting effect and behavior of the people around, which then also becomes part of the spectacle that you're seeing through these boxes. And at a certain moment, people are standing still, and then people start, and then during the piece, what happens is that also people are stopping and seeing, and they're taking pictures. But it's like the big question is there: who's performing for who? Where's the performance? So it's a very interesting paradoxical situation that appears there. And again, here, what I found very interesting is that rather than creating a new piece in the black box, or I am using that spectacle which is already existing, and just finding a different way of approaching it, of perceiving it, of taking place in that space to create a new reality or a performance to observe. Yeah, this is Studio Cité. So this walk in the line is also some part of Studio Cité. Later on, we also created a version which is called Framing the Circle, where we add music and performers. So instead of a line, it's a circle where the dancers are being followed by the people that are wearing these masks. So they get this kind of a view that you see now. I'm just skipping ahead because I would still really like to do a little experiment with those people at home. So this is Framing the Circle. Just a little idea. From outside, it doesn't really look that spectacular, but from inside, you really have this kind of virtual reality experience, a complete immersion of the senses into what it is that you're experiencing. But lastly, there was one last work that I find I really would like to kind of mention before we go into a little experiment, and that is the microsphere. Again, so what I liked in the talk of Katerina this morning, for those who saw it, was that again, it's about paying attention to the details, paying attention to the materiality, paying attention to the structures of the city, which really can change also the way we relate with the city, and kind of change or create a new appreciation of the city landscape that we live in. And so I created this piece called a microsphere, which you're basically laying down and you put your head inside a hole, and then you, with the headphones on with music, and basically you are filming or seeing with the same system as this, just a little frame, the floor. And it is amazing how rich the landscape under our feet is, and people are completely young and old are completely mesmerized by seeing this super rich landscape of all these different details unfolding underneath their feet or on the floor where they normally stand on. Just to give you a small example, here is a video. Of course, now you don't have the music, and it changes a lot when it is actually you lying on it physically. It's almost the experience that you're flying over some kind of moon landscape. And I think the strength of the piece is especially in the moment that you take off, where you are completely lost in this moon landscape, this space that is completely alien to you. And then when you come out and you just realize that it's just part of your everyday reality, that it's taking place under your feet. So just to finish, and I would like to invite you all at home. I have no idea how this works. I don't know who is watching or how this is going, but I would like to invite you to participate in an experience where you need your phone or a small mirror and a pen and a piece of paper. So basically what I invite you to do is to have this mirror here and place it like this, so that you can see, I don't know if you can see my eyes, you can see into the mirror. and so that you can see through the mirror into your surrounding. Now, if you do this in this way, basically the world is upside down. So I just want to give you 1 minute to just explore that space. So it really gives you an idea of how it is, how all these other installations that I showed you work, where the world now is completely turned upside down. And just pay attention what it does to your body. And if you have a window, it's maybe interesting even to look outside. So this is what then, what I, also coming back to the title of Internalizing the Black Box, is that you're basically creating a new framework from which you can perceive the world and see it for literally and figuratively from a different angle. And seeing the shapes and the lines differently. And now from this space, you take your pen and your piece of paper, and you look at the piece of paper through your pen, through your the mirror, and you just try to write your name. Through the mirror. And so literally your whole coordination system is being shifted upside down, and you're approaching reality from a different angle. So, all right, but I leave you can still practice this at home. And I hereby will close the session as I see that it's 3 o'clock. Oh, I still have 4 minutes. No, my clock was running ahead, but I think I've been talking enough, and I'm curious to hear if there's any questions. And it is thereby here the end of this presentation, where I was talking to this little green dot in front of me. Voila.
Okay, so green dot says thank you. It's been really interesting. Thank you for the experiment. I found some new angles at my apartment. So, Benjamin, I'd like to ask you, when you get an idea, and I'm talking about the very first idea, the rawest possible version, do you immediately know whether it would work better in a theater or in a public space? Is it always obvious?
Yes, I mean I like birdwatching 4x4. This first piece that came up was. So I wanted to, I had thought of the installation already beforehand, but I understood that I needed space, and that the theater, the black box, doesn't have that space. So the installations or the ideas that I come up with, they clearly define their own needs of the only being able to work in the public space. So so I was kind of obliged to move into the public space because it wouldn't work in the black box. But then later on, it's just the pieces are mainly directly experienced for the public space, and because they just work better because there is this context of everyday reality constantly rubbing into the work that you're trying to make. So there's this constant interaction with your proposal and the very harsh and crude reality of everyday life and all these inhabitants, and which makes me think that actually I forgot to mention something very important in the presentation, is that what is so interesting is in working in the public space is that you're confronted with all different levels of society that are interacting with your work. And the reactions of that are very interesting. And this is also definitely a reason why I prefer, to a certain extent, or I'm very interested in working in the public space.
Mm-hmm. And how much do your ideas usually change from the very beginning to their realization? Can you talk a little bit about your creative process?
Yeah, people often ask me, like, yeah, but where do you get these ideas from? How is it? But it's a rather like an ongoing story, so that when you start making one piece in that exploration and the research and trying out all these different possibilities, you know, the creation process is more a matter of kind of reducing all the ideas and making choices of all, you know, the things that you have, rather than in a process of inventing new ideas, because usually there are a lot, but it's always about making choices. But in that big landscape of all these different ideas, new seeds are being created for the next creation. So they're all the works that I make are basically one chain of many different ideas, all interlocked into each other.
And how do you find spaces for your works? What are you looking for?
Well, so again, when making all the pieces that I've made in public space, it's always important that there is a certain amount of trafficking of people passing, and that it's places where there is a lot of life already going on, because that is where the everyday choreography and the everyday movement and inhabiting of the space is really alive. Because I've tried some of these installations in places more in nature, which is also a certain kind of public space, but it just doesn't work, because that space is already very kind of neutral and open, and also the norm of what you can and cannot do in that space is not dictated so much. So it's really all the time important that these social rules, that it's a space where these social rules are very visible, and you can see them being enacted by the inhabitants of that space.
And when creating something in public space, is it important for an artist to, for example, do a research about that space, about that spot? For example, its history, its cultural, political context, or on the contrary, do you think that the role of an artist is to offer a completely new gaze and therefore distance himself or herself from how that place is usually seen?
Yeah, I think it really depends from the kind of project that you're really proposing. Also, the economical reality of, how, because it basically also costs money to investigate a space or to be there present for a long time. But in my approach, it's just more generally that I come in just for 1 or 2 days and just. I find it interesting also to have that perspective, like you say, where you coming in fresh and just really looking at the architectural aspect or the materiality of or not being affected by the history of that place, and just seeing the place for how it appears directly to me in that present moment, and then of course there's this whole work. Like when we do Walking the Line, it's really choreographed. So it's really choosing like, okay, we're going to look at these details, that is very interesting here. So to really open up people's gaze to new things, new way of looking at that space that they inhabit.
And you mentioned that in a public space, you are being confronted with the society. How does one prepare for that? Like, do you have to prepare maybe not only professionally, but also mentally?
Well, I think there's only a certain amount of preparation that one can do, because it's just the public space is filled with the unexpected. But I do think what is important, and this just seems to be a quality that is in my work that I didn't really aim for, but it just became apparent throughout the years of creating my work, is that it's because it plays directly on the senses, on the visual, auditorial, perceptual field. So it's really talking directly to the body of the spectator, that it's very everybody from all different ages, all different cultural backgrounds, all different social backgrounds are able to do something with it, because it speaks directly to the senses. So that is an important aspect in, when you're talking about all these different social levels, like to really have that quality, so that the work speaks to everyone without compromising on the quality, the artistic quality of the work. But it's this this accessibility and the kind of somatic aspect of it that is really important. Yeah.
And have you ever experienced some really negative feedback?
Negative feedback, yes. I mean, and that I love it. It's like with interview, we were there for 12 days doing this piece in Utrecht. And you really get the whole scope. You get people that, come to see the show, especially, and they're theater lovers and they see it. And then you have people that pass by and they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, why not? I put my head inside." And then they come out in tears, they're like, "Oh, wow, what happened? I never saw something like this." And then they bring all their friends the next day, and they never saw art or theater. So that happens. And then you also have the other scope where people, they're like, "What? So, excuse me, sir, you're interested to have a look at this installation? What is it? Art? Oh no, art! But then it's it's humbling as an artist also to be confronted with that, that kind of reaction or point of view. But it's also interesting then to just talk with those people and to see what they have to say. And I mean, not that it's very easy always to talk to these people, but just to be more in touch with the reality of our society, whereas in the theater it's really can be a bit of a bubble where it's just we feel we're connected to the world, but we're just connected to a very small segment of the world.
But bubble is also safer. What would you say are the biggest challenges when creating in a public space?
Yeah, it's for sure, just pure on a logistical, practical level. Like, I mean, the times that I've been in the public space and it's raining, or places to store your place, or that it's or they need guards to guard your stuff at night, or like all these kind of things. So this is really just on a practical level. But then it's also a certain sensitivity to those people that inhabit that space. Namely also people, homeless people, for example. So there's all the time, one has to be very sensitive in also where it is that you are presenting your work and how you relate to the people that are inhabiting that work and or that space. And also just there's aggression also in the public space, and how to just through skillful communication, using certain communication techniques, how you can deal with that situation. Yeah.
You're not a rookie in this field, so I'd like to ask you, have you noticed any changes in this scene during your career? Should someone who would like to enter this field be aware of any shifts, any trends, any problems that are happening right now?
Well, I think first of all, just that brings me to like slightly different. I mean, I'll address your question in a moment, but like if it's about encouraging people to move into the public space, I think it's again a place where you can reach a very broad audience. So I think that is important to really, that we artists are present in that space, because you will see that a lot of people are actually really open to it. And it's also the reality is, well, at least in Belgium or Brussels or in Europe, that there's more and more artists making fantastic, interesting work, but there's just not so many theaters that are coming up, and also that there's this financial reality that is challenging for artists all over Europe at this moment. So where, for example, Walking the Line was just very interesting, because I could rehearse it anywhere, anytime. I didn't need, it was, in terms of economics, it was just, the public space is a very interesting place because it's free, you can use it. It has a lot of interesting artistical potential to work with, so that there is this kind of elegant way of dealing with all these challenges that we have as an artist, that in the public space can be really, really interesting. And in terms of, I think it's the also being smart on how to deal with these rules and regulations, and that you kind of clearly see how public space is becoming more and more controlled and less public, and how in terms of architecture, where benches are designed in such a way so you cannot sleep on them anymore, so that they're so I think this you can see as a trend that is in the past 6-7 years that I've been working in public space. You can really see the difference, and something that, well, I think it's an ongoing trend that we're all aware of, but which is sometimes really sad. But it's like you tour around Europe and you see all these different cities, but it's they all start to look the same. They all start to have the same shops, the same way of organizing the public space. So this is it can be challenging to find an interesting place where there's still a kind of messiness, where there's still space for the people that live in the space to fill in the public space in their own way, rather than that everything is being sterilized and determined by all kind of people, who are on top, deciding how things should look like.
Now, when we have to deal with the pandemic and its consequences, is it possible that we'll spend more time outdoors and therefore pay more attention to our public space? Basically, what I'm asking, can the current situation stimulate the rise of street theater, art in public space, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's you see it already happening, that the solution, especially now in the summer, for the theaters to continue is to do it outdoors. I think also the arts, to connect to your previous question, also I think the arts will have a very important role to play in how to kind of deal with the situation in a public space that is now, but also like how to re-inhabit when we go back to what it was. This is an illusion, but when we are lifting away these social distance restrictions, etc., like how to reintegrate the public space, how to fill it in again, how to find new ways to fill it in again. Like, I think there we'll play a very important role in guiding people back into the public space and the free use of public space. Yeah.
We do have some questions from the audience. So in your opinion, why is it important to create new perceptions of the city for the people who live there?
Well, as human beings, we are habit animals. So we are, if we're all the time taking the same route in the same kind of pathway, we kind of are in a routine, and we are kind of dulled in our appreciation for the city and seeing new openings or new possibilities, and just so what I find interesting there is that you, by creating these artistic proposals, you're making a crack in this routine and these habits, and just creating a new way of perceiving the city. And I think why I find that so important, well, it's just especially because you can you become aware of your own agency, and I think this is important, your own agency in making your own reality. That the way you perceive things, by perceiving things differently, you also experiencing them differently. So you have a big agency on how you perceive the world and then act in the world and are in the world. And it's especially your surroundings that you know so very well. If they can magically be transformed into something completely new, there is an opening that is created there of new possibilities, which I find very interesting as an artist.
Another one, what if I'm a young artist who would like to start to work with public space? What could be the starting point of my work? What could be the very first steps for an artist who says, okay, I'm done with theater, I'm going to create something in a public space?
Well, very basically, coming back to the beginning of the talk, it's paying attention, spending time in the public space. And for example, actually, I didn't mention that, but birdwatching 4x4, birdwatching, the indoor version, started with this practice where we were just sitting in the public space for hours in the same spot, so 6 hours, 8 hours on a bench. I could only move to go to toilet, but it was just about sitting there and just observing. And just by paying attention, like you start to see the public space differently and start to understand the potential of the public space, and also start to understand what is it that the public space needs. So rather than thinking, oh, I'm going to implement that in the public space, it's more about taking that position of listening and paying attention and being and inhabiting that public space, already living that public space in a different way than that you're used to. And then from there, I find that's an interesting place to start working.
And I'd also like to ask you, do you think that your experience in the theater helps you in a public space when you create in a public space? And in general, like, is this experience helpful, or maybe, going directly in a public space might be easier?
No, I think definitely the background of the black box, the kind of more refined way of seeing and perceiving and understanding all these possibilities. It's almost as if that was the school where you learn the skills in a kind of very isolated environment, and it's exactly that richness of all these skills to then apply them into the theater, to the public space, that then becomes a very interesting. And actually, just to give an example, whereas with birdwatching 4x4, I'm literally taking the tribune out of the black box and turning it not to the theater, but turning it to everyday reality, and then everyday reality becomes the performance, and becomes the artwork. And I think that movement, which only comes because I came from the black box, I find that very interesting, like declaring not the stage as that is where the theater and the performance happens, but declaring the public space as the performance.
So, as we mentioned a few times, next year in Vilnius, you're going to present Walking the Line, and I think this is the right time for you to invite the audience.
Well, if you want to, in a very elegant but efficient way, experience that urban landscape of Vilnius in a completely different way, and have a place or an experience where your senses are completely opened up and heightened to extent where you are in the public space, but completely experiencing from a different way. If you're interested in that, then come and join us next year. In I guess it will be July. Yeah.
Okay, so looking forward to experiencing this. Benjamin, thank you very much. It's been great talking to you. Thanks to all who watched us, and I hope I'll see you in other sessions tomorrow.
Yes. Cool.